What I wanted to talk about as my news item was issues around IPOs, so initial public offerings, when you first take a business to market. But I think given the state of markets at the moment, it would be silly to just talk about that without maybe just spending a little bit of time talking about the free fall on equity markets globally at the moment, which everybody's describing, the BBC especially, is describing as being caused entirely by Trump's tariffs. And I do think that the tariffs and the discussion around them and the kind of tit for tat nature that we're seeing is really has been something that has tipped stock markets over the edge almost. But I would argue quite strongly that stock markets has been overvalued for a long time, particularly the US market. And actually, what we are seeing is a much wider shift away from the kind of consensus that we've had for the past 5 decades, maybe you might say, where everything is denominated in dollars. The value of the dollar is very high. The US is expected to pick up the pieces, not just in things like defence, but in things like stock markets. So in the past, when things like this happen, you kind of know you're getting to the end when the Fed says so. And the Fed will often, in these circumstances, step in and calm the markets. And interestingly, they don't seem to be doing that. So that's another, I think, example of the fact that America is no longer going to be willing to step in and pick up the pieces all the time, which goes back to that idea we're in a bit of a political revolution at the moment. So I wouldn't think, if Trump got rid of all the tariffs tomorrow, I don't think stock markets would just rebound and everything would be like it was the day before he announced them. I do think we're in a real position where things are changing quite quickly. So I thought it was worth saying that. There's a few ideas floating around, and I don't know how much truth there is to some of these. Some quite reputable people seem to be saying it, but there's this idea of the Mar-a-Lago Accord. Do you know anything about that?
No.
So this is a bit like the Plaza Accord that we had in the 1980s. This is a discussion around how you reduce the value of the dollar. And so the idea that some people have floated is that what a lot of the tariff stuff about is effectively Trump bringing people to the table. Because you probably know that lots of people, but especially China, holds huge amounts of US Treasury stock. So that's debt issued by US government. Now, the US government is paying something like 4.5% interest on that at the moment. And that is part of what the problem is for the US. It has a lot of debt. It's paying a lot of interest on it to China and to other people as well. Now, there seems to be some idea that Trump wants to bring the Chinese to the table and say, okay, guys, you trade in all that Treasury debt that you've got now, and I'll give you in return a new Treasury debt. It's a 100-year debt, and it pays 1% interest. So what that would do is devalue the dollar. It would reduce the interest overhang that's dragging down the US economy, and it would reset everything. So it would be a way of resetting a lot of those big trade imbalances that we've got. Now, I don't know whether there's any truth to these ideas, but that seems to me quite an interesting way in which you might resolve things, because things aren't resolved until we do address some of those big imbalances. Now, what China could do, presumably, is it could say, oh, do you know what, I don't much like the look of this US Treasury debt anymore, I'm just going to sell it all. Now, what that would do is it would plunge markets into even greater disorder. It would massively increase the yield on US debt, so they have to pay much higher interest rates. Do you remember we did that episode on discount rates, and when the price of bonds goes down, the yield on bonds goes up. So if everybody's flooding the market with US Treasury debt, the price goes down, the yield goes up, so interest rates go massively high in the US and probably everywhere else as well. So there's lots of things here that could happen that could tip things into quite significant disarray quite quickly. But, it kind of feels that if Trump plays it well, this could be a way out of some of these issues.